I said to him, you know, if you're out, don't engage in any arguments, don't engage in any fights, because these people don't fight with their hands anymore. They're too quick to pull the guns.
Can you imagine 40 minutes, a child leaves, and that's it. You don't get to see him. And the last words that he says to you is, I'll pay you for the hydro.
2 detectives knocked at my door, asked me if Gabriel lived here and that there was a shooting. And I said, is he okay? And they said, no, he didn't make it.
We were just chit-chatting and laughing and everything. And then less than half an hour after that is when I heard the gunshot and I found him on the driveway.
In individual communities, everybody's watching.
Witnesses solve our murders, surveillance, DNA. But if we don't have any of those 3, then we've got a little bit of a hurdle.
We did not have any eyewitnesses coming forward. It was almost a blanket that was put over everybody.
Welcome to Crime Beat, I'm Anthony Robart. Tonight, when gun violence takes down a number of young men in the streets of Toronto, their shattered families want justice. But in many of these cases, the killers remain free, protected by a lack of evidence and witnesses willing to come forward. Here now is Karen Lieberman with Code of Silence.
Kelly Wetter had been really proud of her son Gabriel Nikov when she said goodbye to him on April 13th, 2016.
I was on hiatus from the TV show I was working on at the time, so I was here and he was here with a friend, and they had their resumes. They were going to look for a job. So they took off after lunch, like early afternoon.
He texted later to say he'd gotten a job at Cafe Diplomatico.
Like when he'd have sleepovers or with a couple buddies, we would always go there for brunch. And I was like, way to go, that's my boy. But he's like, you're gonna have to pay for my phone bill, so when they call me for my shift, I'll get the call. And I said, well, of course I'll pay for your phone bill. And I said, well, hey, way to go, see you later, kind of thing. And then he didn't come home, which isn't unusual either, because he did spend the night at his girlfriend's a few times, and he would let me know though. So I was texting, where the hell are you? I'm gonna have to call the police.
Yonge and Bloor Street's a very popular area. It's a main transit hub for the Toronto Transit Commission, and it has a subway station that's one of the main ones in downtown Toronto. It's a commercial and a retail area. There's not many residences there other than condominiums, but it's primarily a place where people go downtown to shop. On that day in particular, it was a real mild spring night, early evening. It was full of pedestrians and vehicular traffic, whether people who lived in the area, commuters, as well as people going downtown to enjoy the evening.
It was 8 p.m. Wednesday outside a coffee shop at Yonge and Bloor when witnesses watched as a man was shot dead.
Shots rang out here outside this Tim Hortons on Yonge near Bloor. A young man was killed, and police have now identified that victim.
I would have arrived approximately an hour to an hour and a half later, and the whole area is cordoned off. We quickly learned that the victim was around 18 years old. He had been shot 6 times in the back, and he succumbed to his injuries right there on the sidewalk. We weren't sure who the suspect was. Naturally, we want to look for witnesses and surveillance footage. I was confident, as at Tim Hortons, they were collaborating with the local police station through the neighborhood policing to purchase quality surveillance cameras to capture footage in that area to support any crimes that were occurring.
The coffee shop has since moved, but on that night, their video cameras caught everything from the moment Gabriel showed up with 2 friends. They were hanging around the doorway when a man and woman approached the store.
At one point, we observe a male walking with a female coming towards the front of the Tim Hortons. One of Gabriel's acquaintances approached the male, and there was a conversation between the both of them. And you can tell by the surveillance footage that the male that approached with the female wasn't comfortable with the conversation. There were some words exchanged. They stayed for a few seconds, and then the male and the female entered into the Tim Hortons. As
they order, they're talking and looking back outside.
It's obvious that the discussion they're having is in relation to the interaction they had with this male outside. And you could tell they were deciding on what the plan was when they're returning out onto the sidewalk.
They finally exit and a short fight occurs before they break apart and walk in opposite directions. But then
the male can be seen on the footage running back towards Gabriel southbound and shooting him 6 times in the back.
And then at 8 o'clock in the morning, the 2 detectives knocked at my door, asked me if Gabriel lived here and that there was a shooting. And I said, is he okay? And they said, no, he didn't make it. Something happens in your brain, something turns over, turns around, goes sideways. And I just started to pace. Like, I don't think it really, I was like, what? He's dead? How can that be? Like, it doesn't make any sense.
That same year, in another part of the city, Kissinger Gunn was a 26-year-old dad of 4 who visited his mom every Tuesday, Thursday, and Sunday. The last time was Thursday, September 8th.
We were in the living room, just something came on the TV that someone had been shot and killed the night previous. I said to him, you know, if you're out, don't engage in any arguments, don't engage in any fights, because these people don't fight with their hands anymore. They're too quick to pull the guns for whatever reason. And he's like, Mommy, stop worrying about me. You're always worrying about me. Nothing's gonna happen to me. I'm like, good, because I don't want to take care of all your kids. So you better make sure that nothing happens to you. And I just kind of gave him on his head and told him I loved him and went upstairs to go lay down. And shortly after, he called up the stairs and said he was leaving and he'd see me Sunday and that he loved me.
But Kissinger went out that Sunday. His sister was babysitting the kids when Evelyn got home from work around midnight. It was a hot night, and the youngest was crying.
And I said, okay, well, if she doesn't stop fussing, I'll call Kissinger. I kept saying in my head, just call him to come home and be with the kids. Because if I had called, he would have came. It wouldn't have been an argument. There would have been no buts, no nothing. He would have just been, okay, I'm coming. And I kept fighting inside my mind to call him, but at the same time, I'm thinking he's been under a lot of stress lately. He deserves a night out.
Sunday, September the 11th, 2016, Kissinger attended a birthday party at the 42 Supper Club, which is located at number 42 on Mowat Avenue in the Liberty Village neighborhood. He attended this event with some family and friends. There was over 200 patrons in the premise at this particular night. I received a call early Sunday morning at approximately 4 a.m. and we were told that an individual was shot and there was an emergency run to the hospital and he was in a life-threatening condition.
There was cops everywhere. Like, I'd never seen so many cops in such a small space. The nurse is walking with me and I'm thinking in my head, God, please let it be somebody else. Please let it be a mistake. Please let it be somebody else. They had his face covered, blood everywhere. And all I did all day was clean blood off his face and just take care of him. I'm somebody who can't even watch a horror movie. And I was subjected to watching what a bullet did to my son's brain for 15 hours. And I will be traumatized for the rest of my life. It plays in my head over and over and over again all the time. And it's an image that I just cannot get out.
Kissinger had been at the party with his fiancée and godbrother. They'd left around 3:30 and were pulling out of the parking lot when his godbrother spotted a friend arguing with someone across the street and got out, hoping to convince him to leave with them.
His godbrother recognized someone that was involved in an altercation taking place in the parking lot. Kissinger followed him to assist. And upon arrival, the verbal altercation led to a physical altercation. Several shots were fired and Kissinger was shot.
Cameras around the parking lots captured some of what happened.
The frustrating part is the fact that the actual shooting takes place off camera. But at the same time, we can see that there is obviously witnesses here that clearly have a sight line. They're within the vicinity where you can actually hear what took place and what was said. You can obviously see something tragic has happened and they're trying to get away from it. So they're living at a high rate of speed. People are nervous, people are scared, but then you also have individuals that attempt to go back and they change their mind.
Police spoke to a few people who'd hung around, but not the ones closest to the incident.
patrons involved in the altercation, they fled the scene. A number of patrons got into vehicles and fled the scene, including our suspect.
Welcome back. At the end of 2016, two devastated mothers are mourning their sons who were senselessly gunned down in the middle of doing everyday things. Now, 3 weeks into the new year, another mother faces the same excruciating loss. We now return to Karen Lieberman and Code of Silence.
24-year-old Dylan Gil usually went to a club with his friends on Sunday nights. January 22nd, 2017 was no different.
He went and played basketball at 8 o'clock. He came home around 10:30, and I made him something to eat. Pizza bucket, of course, that was his favorite. After he had gotten ready, it was around 12 o'clock. His phone rang. I guess whoever was going to pick him up. I asked him, who's here? And he goes, it's my ride. And I go, okay, do you have your house keys? So he took his keys, put them in his pocket. And as he was leaving, he goes, Mama, I'm going to help you with the hydro tomorrow. And I said, I love you. And he said, I love you. And then he left. That was 12:05.
On Monday, January 23rd, 2017, at approximately 12:50 a.m., Toronto Police Communications received a 911 call to attend the area of Islington Avenue and Milady Road with regards to a shooting.
The victim was transported to hospital with life-threatening injuries, and now we know that homicide investigators have taken over this investigation.
Myself and several other investigators attended that crime scene. It was fairly cold, and it was in the middle of the night.
When I arrived on scene, I could see that there were bullet casings on the roadway of Islington Avenue. Forensics officers were dealing with that. I spoke to the divisional detectives, and what they told me was the deceased, Mr. Dylan Gil, was in a vehicle with two other friends. They were driving southbound Islington Avenue. At this point, a suspect vehicle approached the passenger side of their vehicle, and one of the suspects started discharging his firearm. Unfortunately, several rounds were fired at the vehicle, and one of those stray bullets actually hit Dylan while he was sitting in the back seat of the vehicle.
The women told detectives they'd been at Cameo Lounge about 3 kilometers away.
Dylan and two of his friends were in this nightclub.
So this lounge at the time was a hookah lounge. That night there was a rap video being taped. It was a pretty busy night that night. My understanding was that Dylan and the friends attended there just shortly after midnight. I believe they had a few drinks and they decided to leave for some unknown reason.
It was within minutes of them leaving this nightclub that the shooting occurred.
3:15, 3:20, I started calling him, he didn't answer. And then I text him, Dylan, answer your phone. And then of course I got angry, why he's not answering or texting me back. So I said, Dylan, answer your damn phone. No response. 5:45, my phone rings, it's unknown, and I go, oh, maybe it is finally Dylan. And when I answered it, they go, hi, is this Barbara Gill? And I go, yes, it is. And they go, this is Detective Mike Carboni from Homicide. We're going to be there in 15 minutes to speak to you. I lost everything. I went totally blank after he said that we're sorry to tell you that your son didn't make it. Can you imagine 40 minutes, a child leaves, and that's it. You don't get to see him. And the last words that he says to you is, I'll pay you for the hydro. When I saw him at the church, I kept kissing him on his forehead and stroking his head. And then I whispered to him and I said, baby, I promise you I will find out who did it. And I will get you justice, I promise you. And that was it.
Detectives spoke to the friends who'd been in the car trying to figure out a motive.
Were they the intended targets, or were they involved in making Dylan available to be murdered? We were looking at all of those possibilities. That didn't turn out to be the case. They were very complimentary of Dylan. They didn't know of any type of issues that he had with anyone. I tried to explore the possibility that this could be a case of some type of road rage, but you know, it was ruled out fairly quickly.
I believe Dylan was not the intended victim, nor were the girls. I know that vehicle was tinted, you couldn't see inside, so you wouldn't know that Dylan was in the back seat. For some reason, I believe it was followed from the club, but again, at this point, you know, why the girls, why Dylan, why the car?
They indicated that there were individuals in there that may have given Dylan a look that made them feel uncomfortable. That was also another starting point for us. We now know that during the evening of Sunday, January 22nd, 2017, a rap artist known as Robin Banks was filming a video. Many of the people that were in attendance were there to watch or perform in the music video. I am appealing to anyone that was at the club that evening to contact us at the homicides.
6 months later, to the day, another shooting takes place in the east end of the city.
On July 23rd, it was after 12 o'clock, there was a shooting not far from where we lived.
A birthday party in Scarborough with more than 200 guests turned deadly. 2 people are dead and 1 woman is in hospital in serious condition. Police are still on the hunt for possible suspects.
The birthday girl, she was shot as well.
That morning, Shauna Brown had been thankful her son Demal Graham wasn't there, even though he knew the girl.
I remember him and I talking about it and him saying, give it a few days and I'm gonna go visit her in the hospital. And that really touched me because he has not stepped in a hospital since his dad had passed. So for him to say that, I knew that this was somebody that was important to him. That conversation was probably around 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and then shortly after that, my girls and I went out to go and visit a friend that was in the hospital.
They returned just after 6 p.m. Demal was out front with his stepbrother and stepbrother's friend, watching his daughter play a few doors down at a neighbor's.
We were just chit-chatting and laughing and everything, and then I went inside and they stayed there, and less than half an hour after that is when I heard the gunshot and heard my daughter scream, and I ran out and I found him on the driveway.
25-year-old Demal Graham was fatally shot outside of a home in Malvern on Sunday, just a little after 6:30 in the evening.
The area of the home is kind of in a corner of the complex. There's a vehicle in the driveway. The deceased is on the ground between the stoop and the vehicle. So everybody is outside wanting to know what's happening. Demal's mother, she had younger daughters to consider, especially the fact that this crime happened on her property. Her daughter's window was open and she could hear it as it was happening. So she had to manage her family more than anything.
Neighbors running, my daughter's obviously upset and crying, me the same thing, people running to try to help and stuff like that. So yeah, it was just complete chaos and complete utter shock. My granddaughter was still outside a neighbor's steps playing, so I had to yell to my daughter, like, yell out the window, tell them to bring her inside. You don't know if they're coming back, you don't know what's going on, who it was, you name it.
He was a very well-liked person in the neighborhood. Everybody was looking on because everybody really liked Demal. We had learned that a car had driven by very slowly, and we believe that same car came back a short time later, stopped in front of the unit, and at that time, a person exited the vehicle and murdered Demal Graham. There was no conversation. It was so quick. Came in, shot the gun at him multiple times. Demal fell to the ground. The shooter returned to the car and sped away. Unfortunately, we did not have any eyewitnesses coming forward to give us any further information pertaining to the vehicle that was seen or to the description of the shooter. It was almost a blanket that was put over everybody.
Welcome back. Between 2012 and 2017, Toronto saw 371 homicides. Over half were shootings. Now, police solved nearly 90% of the non-gun cases, but only 39% of shootings. The key issue? Lack of evidence, and one critical need. We now return to Karen Lieberman and Code of Silence.
At the end of the day, witnesses solve our murders, surveillance, DNA. But if we don't have any of those three, then we've got a little bit of a hurdle. There was no contact, no physical contact with Dylan or anybody to have that DNA transfer. The only evidence we had were the casings.
They become valuable because they assist investigators in linking those casings to a firearm should it be seized. However, my experience and the experience of pretty well every other investigator probably in Canada is that these firearms are not, unique to one individual. They are often sold to other individuals, rented to other individuals. Although we can link a firearm to an individual because they were found in possession of that firearm, it does not necessarily link that individual to the homicide of Dylan.
Ballistics didn't help in the Kissinger Gunn or Demal Graham investigations either.
We're familiar with the caliber of weapon. Ultimately, we need the actual firearm that fired the gun. And based on the evidence that was left behind, if we at some point do recover that firearm, we'll be able to match those ballistics.
We got nothing back from IBIS. We have never had a return. I've never received any further updates from Center for Forensic Science with regards to any matches. So it's safe to say that the firearm that was used has been either discarded or buried and never used again.
Often in shooting cases, it comes down to video and witnesses.
We had a few people that heard sounds of gunshots, but in regards to suspect information, we were very limited.
The night Dylan Gil was shot, the front seat passenger only had time to notice that it was a dark vehicle before her friend turned off onto a side street.
What we did have were some people that were driving their vehicles right behind this. And we had a few witnesses that did say that what they saw was a white car and a black car, and all of a sudden there were shots being fired. So we know from eyewitnesses that it is a black, smaller vehicle. We were fortunate to get some video that actually showed the suspect vehicle and the incident, but unfortunately it was very grainy.
The only other lead came from inside the club.
We have reviewed CCTV footage from within the establishment and have observed two male persons of interest that appear to have had some interaction with the deceased just prior to him leaving the club. Putting that video out, I had some expectation that someone from that night would be able to identify these folks. Unfortunately, that did not happen. It's hard to know if the folks inside had anything to do with the homicide. Could the offenders have been setting on him before he got into the nightclub, or were they individuals from inside the nightclub that were, waiting for him to leave? It's very difficult to glean just from the video. This is where we need the participation of some individuals who were in the nightclub, who may have seen a little bit of what was going on inside.
And there's no video showing who might have followed the three of them outside the club?
There was no video. It was a very dark plaza. I believe there were 16 cameras and only 6 were working that night.
I'm appealing to anyone who knows or can identify these two males to contact me at the Toronto Police Homicide Squad.
Investigators in Kissinger Gunn's case had similar frustrations. They had ballistics, but no weapon, and a suspect, but no way to ID him.
We know there were witnesses to the incident. Based on the lighting, the angle of the video, we're able to see the shape of the vehicles, and we're able to identify maybe a make of a vehicle, but we weren't able to capture specific license plates at that time.
They found someone who'd been involved in the fight outside the club. The person didn't know the shooter, but gave a corroborated description of him.
Our suspect can be described as a male black, approximately 18 to 22 years old, the dark complexion, 5 feet 11 to 6 feet, slim build. His hair can be described as being in braided cornrows. He was last seen wearing a white hooded sweatshirt with black prints.
There were different accounts of which vehicle the suspect got into. Some said a white car, others said black. What police do know is the suspect had been inside 42 Supper Club that night, along with 200 other people, and about 20 to 30 of them witnessed the shooting.
Our chief of police has authorized a $50,000 reward for information leading to an arrest or conviction in regards to the murder of Kissinger Gunn. We know there's someone there that can identify the shooter and that knows the shooter, who he is, and we're asking that those individuals come forward and speak to police.
I'm here today to plead for anyone who witnessed the murder of my son Kissinger to please come forward. I wish there were adequate words to emphasize the complete devastation and heartache losing Kissinger has caused my family and myself. My tears are endless. My grief is unrelenting.
In the wake of Demal Graham's murder, police had even less to go on.
The video evidence in this particular case was very weak, although it did give us a vehicle of interest, this brown four-door vehicle that circles the block twice, and that is as good as it gets, unfortunately. We couldn't even tell you what type of model the vehicle was. The video is not in front of the home. It's a little ways before. We could see the vehicle looping. Can't see anybody getting out. Can't even make out persons in the vehicle. We know that this car is involved. The timeline matches the time of the shooting. We weren't able to track it any further than leaving the complex. Going to local businesses that were 2-3 kilometers away, unfortunately proved empty for us.
Even worse, nobody from the neighborhood was talking.
Unfortunately, what we've seen happen in a lot of housing complexes is the idea that don't get involved, don't want to be in court, you don't want to assist police, the police are not our friends, afraid of retribution. So with respect to eyewitnesses, we had no viable eyewitnesses. I will say that Shauna, who is Demal's mom, was a strong advocate for people coming forward and giving information. She knew people knew things, and she was relentless in approaching these people and trying to get them to come speak to police.
The streets know, the people know, and yet we're still seeking justice.
Like every mother whose son has been killed, Shauna Brown wants justice. But there's one thing standing in her way.
Is there anyone that would have seen what happened?
Oh, yes, of course. There was lots of people that saw what happened. Demal's murder, like, no shadow of a doubt. It's unsolved, but it's solvable. It's just because of the street mentality, snitches get stitches, or don't be a rat. It's unfortunate, because if it wasn't for that, the person that killed my son would have been held accountable long ago. But he's not been held accountable because nobody wants to come forward and identify and say, yeah, this is what I saw, this is what I know.
Eyewitness testimony, evidence, is crucial in homicide investigations. They are the ones that will tell us what actually happened. Police officers, we're there after the fact, right? We need to put the puzzle together. I do believe that there is a fear factor that plays a big part with witnesses. Right? I've had people tell me many times, you know what, Ted, I'm afraid for my family. We know who did it, I just can't come forward.
Communities like Empringham.
Empringham is a subsidized housing community. I have been going to Empringham since I was a high school student. It wasn't until I got into law enforcement that I understood that there was a propensity for violence in that neighborhood. Firearm possessions, shootings, homicides, I know a lot of drug dealing. It was a place that you didn't go to. However, as time went on, it started to dwindle. A lot of people were moving out. Not as many violent crimes were being actually reported or committed in that neighborhood.
The fact the neighborhood had indeed changed was evident on the day Demal was killed.
I remember when we got there, seeing kids still outside playing. Nobody was really that concerned. Although there was a murder that just occurred the night before, the early rumors we heard was another neighborhood was having some sort of conflict with people in Empringham, and that they were going to be the ones responsible for the shooting that ultimately killed Demal Graham. Unfortunately, that complex did not have any video for us and didn't really assist us much in that avenue of the investigation.
They weren't getting much help from anyone else either, bumping up against a code of silence.
So the code of silence is quite often associated with lower income neighborhoods, communities that have traditionally negative or contentious associations with the police. Quite often they're associated with prohibitions against being seen to comply with police investigations, to call the police if you have a problem. Even being seen as speaking with the police can be risky for individuals, and the risks are reputational in nature, that you might be perceived differently by other people who live in the neighborhood. But also there are risks attached with physical violence or other types of violent reprisals that might be associated with being seen as a snitch, a rat, a tattletale, whichever of these terms that you might want to use. But certainly in popular culture, these anti-snitching discourses, they're conveyed in music, on social media, television entertainment, and movies as well. So generally in society, the idea is widespread.
I can never snitch, that's on my kid. I put a chopper on a blade, put a blade on his zip.
I think the definition has been twisted because community members who watch something happen is not a snitch. They're a witness, they're an eyewitness to an event, and it's much different. The snitch is usually speaking out of turn amongst people that they know or are close to. So coming forward, you're doing your part as a community member in assisting an investigation. That does not make you a snitch.
In individual communities, everybody's watching. And there's supporters of the police and there's non-supporters of the police. And even though somebody wants to do the right thing, they struggle with the balance of sharing information and then paying the consequences.
The concern is that words travel and information travels quickly in the street, that even if I'm not involved in crime, if I'm not involved in gangs, if I'm being seen as somebody who might put those individuals, people who are involved in crime or violence, in legal jeopardy, that risk to them is just simply for many people not worth it.
People have to live in those areas, they have no choice, and they're good people, but unfortunately, they run the risk of their own safety, and that's what they're worried about.
It doesn't help that the nature of gun violence has evolved.
Gang life has changed, that in some cases, sort of the established criminal gangs, yes, they certainly presented the threat of violence for individuals, but they also provided a sense of order, a sort of sense of predictability, that there were codes, street codes that kind of governed when and how violence would be used. This has changed. So greater access to firearms, changing attitudes and norms towards firearms, and violence that's not only emanating from established criminal gangs, as many people would think of them.
It's more the individual. Individuals, groups of 2-3 people, for the most part, they're just kids that are, hey, we're gonna go do this. Do you wanna come with us?
It's not only threat of violence, reprisals from those more established criminal players, but violence is now more widespread. And that poses real risks to individuals, right?
It's a tough spot for investigators, especially if they know who did it.
There's evidence out there. There's always somebody out there that can share something that are going to point you in the right direction to make that actual arrest and laying the appropriate charges. Not having that is difficult.
Overcoming that reluctance is a big hurdle.
That is a project that will take time, that will take changes in culture and attitudes and belief that has to be born not only out of police practices,
We're trying to make the neighborhood safer,
but also out of addressing the conditions that many young people find themselves in. Part of that also has to come with attitudes towards the police that has to do with the work the police have to be involved with. So the police have spent a lot of time and a lot of attention to try to address that relationship problem. They have a neighborhood officer program right now where officers are stationed for longer periods of time in specific neighborhoods. And the idea is that they can spend time developing positive, trusting relationships with neighborhood residents. They see the police as being somebody who's aligned with their interests, that they're more likely to assist the police in those situations.
It's important because that help can lead to an arrest, as it did in the case of Gabriel Nikov.
Typically, when you investigate a homicide that's outside of a melting pot of people, it's difficult to have witnesses to come forward. And being that it was in that downtown core of Toronto, you have a mix of everybody. And because we had that, we had so many people come forward.
4 bangs on the door, sounded like a hammer on wood.
And giving their piece of the puzzle. It took upwards of 2 days to actually solve this murder investigation.
Welcome back. Without sufficient evidence or witnesses, police often can't deliver justice to grieving families. But sometimes people speak up, and that's when cases get solved. We now return to Karen Lieberman and the conclusion of Code of Silence.
This was a very different investigation. It wasn't involving any gang activity. It was one of those random shootings in downtown Toronto. As much as horrific, it was much easier to solve because we had so many different people there. So many different walks of life that they don't feel that any one person, if they come forward, is going to be identified as providing information to the police.
Dozens upon dozens of officers are here in this very popular and upscale area, interviewing the many witnesses who were here and who possibly heard those up to 5 gunshots.
There were upwards of 160 people that came forward. There's so much video surveillance and so many cameras at so many different locations. Everything in its totality was captured.
The day after Gabriel was shot, police were contacted by a children's aid worker in Niagara Falls who'd received a troubling phone call from one of her former wards.
He had told her to watch the news on television and to watch what had occurred at Yonge and Bloor Street. And the discussion was relating to not that he did anything, but he was there. The way that the message was delivered, he was the one responsible. That's what she felt. And then she had the obligation to report this to the police. She identified him as Bradley Chevaldayoff. We quickly learned that he was no stranger to the judicial system. He had made a threat to a Toronto Transit bus driver, threatened to shoot him. He also slashed another male on a busy subway platform in downtown Toronto. He was convicted for both and was on a lifetime weapons prohibition.
They figured out what neighborhood he was likely to be in and canvassed buildings in the area.
We were able to obtain some surveillance footage from a camera in a stairwell of Bradley Chevaldayoff standing with 3 other males, and he was reenacting what had occurred on Yonge Street with the shooting. During that evening, officers recognized him walking down the sidewalk and then arrested him without any incident. He was initially charged with second-degree murder, but the jury found him guilty of manslaughter. He received a 16-year sentence. He had a reduction of 4 years for the time served in the pretrial custody, so he was to serve 12 years.
Your shirt says justice for Gabriel. Do you feel that there's been justice for him?
No. But you know, there never will be, because nothing brings him back. It doesn't matter if it was life, I'm still going to feel the same way. I don't think about him. I don't say his name. I don't give him any kind of space in my head. He's not going to ruin my life. I'm going to live the best life I can for Gabriel. And I think he'd be proud of me, and I think he is. I believe in the signs that some of us are getting. I get red balloons that just sort of randomly appear or float by.
Sometimes Gabriel's friends see them too and send her pictures. One time a balloon appeared during an on-set break at work.
It's around 8 o'clock at night, around the same time he passed away. We're sitting at a table outside of the trailer, and this makeup artist said, "Kelly, there's a red balloon floating behind your head." And it came over me and started like giving me a hug, kind of went like this all over me, down my knees, down my feet, and there's 6 people. And then it just sort of floated. I said, "It's my birthday. That's Gabriel. I know it."
Kelly surrounds herself with memories of Gabriel.
You kept a lot of Gabriel's things here.
Yes, I did.
From his handwritten list of goals to the jacket he was wearing the night he was shot.
Bullet holes here, and it used to smell like him. And
After his murder, she joined with other mothers in speaking out against gun violence and found a special way to honor her son.
I started the Red Balloon Foundation. It's to help somebody pick up a book instead of a gun, and a young person to further their education and stay focused and have hope and help.
Save our daughters! Save our sons!
We're not going to stop. You know, if 5 people put their guns away and change their life, we'd be happy.
This is not a photo op for us.
Evelyn Fox is pleading with city leaders to address the roots of gun violence.
In the name of all the grieving mothers in this city, do what is right. I think it's the anger, the survivor in me. I just really wanted to keep my son's name and face out there so that people who were there that night can see that I'm still waiting for someone to come forward. That was my sole purpose at first, was just to get him justice. I started to really advocate for the underserved communities to get more funding because they are the ones who are predominantly impacted. Invest in underserved communities and give opportunities for youth to deter them from crime.
Something she wishes had been done for whoever killed Kissinger.
At first, I kind of felt sorry for the guy. He has to live with the fact that he killed somebody, the completely innocent person that was just a bystander. But as time went on, I just got angry and I lose hope, even in society. The code of silence should not apply to homicides, period. I just don't understand how there's so many people outside that club and not one of them wants to come forward and point this guy out and hold him accountable. What if it had been your family? It's hard. I miss my son every day. I hate life without him.
Shauna Brown is trying to cope with the new normal after losing her son, Demal Graham, on July 23rd.
I don't have a choice but to be strong. I can't curl up and avoid it. I have to speak out.
I started becoming involved in advocating literally 3 weeks after Demal was killed. And that's when I started my connection with some of the other moms. And it's the best friendships that I've ever had. We get each other, we relate to each other, we know how to support one another, and it's huge.
It's almost like it's a subject that people don't want to touch. You know what I mean?
One of the things they most understand is her frustration that Demal's case is still unsolved.
Awareness to the impact that it has on victims by
There was lots of information that I've heard, down to very clearly the person, but I can't do anything, and the detectives can't do anything unless somebody comes forward and identifies that person. It's like you're giving more respect to some street code and to this individual that took my son's life than you are to my son. It's sad. They might not have pulled the trigger, but they're just as much a part of the problem. And usually people do that, you know, I'm gonna stand back, but you know what? I never thought it would reach my door, and it literally reached my door. I understand to a certain extent why they don't, you know, necessarily trust and believe that the police will support them if they come forward with information, but it has to start somewhere. It's long overdue. There's too many of us that are waiting for our kids' murders to be solved.
I have begged for the last 8 years for anybody that might have any information, minute, something they might think is not important or not essential, just let it be known and let it be taken from there what the detectives want to do about it. You never know, that small little bit of information they might, you know, bring forward, that might give us that break that we need.
As she waits for answers, Barb finds ways to help other moms like herself.
So I found some things that when I read them, it was exactly how I felt. So I thought, why not put it into a little book and let others, and call it Mother's Right to Mourn, and let other mothers that can express their feelings like myself, and let them read it and say, okay, that's exactly how I feel. I also started knitting, which kind of makes me happy, and I call them DG blankets, says Dylan Gil, and I like to donate them and give them to people. Maybe it gives them a little bit of solace, you know? Makes me happy. He was my love, he was my life, he was the air I breathed, everything. That's one thing in my life that I was so proud of, that kid. I wish I had taken it for him, and he had lived.
In the last 10 years, there have been 836 homicides in Toronto. Almost 600 of those have been solved. The murders of Kissinger, Gunn, Dylan Gil, and Demal Graham are among the remaining unsolved cases. Police say that in 90% of them, they know who did it, but don't have the evidence they need. If you know anything that could help solve these cases, you can contact Toronto Police Homicide or Crime Stoppers. Thank you for joining us tonight on Crime Beat. I'm Anthony Robart. Want more episodes of Crime Beat? Listen to the Crime Beat podcast now for free on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you find your favorite podcast. And for past episodes of Crime Beat, go to the Global TV app, visit globaltv.com, or check out our Crime Beat YouTube page.